One unit coming in. 41. 21.
Over here on the far end, we have Jerry Boyle. Jerry is a civil liberties attorney. He's a civil rights lawyer, and he does a lot of work with the National Lawyers Guild as a watcher on the streets of protests like this that happen. Freddy Martinez, you saw both of them in the video. He's a programmer who's also done a lot of FOIA work and actually won an interesting case recently that he'll talk to us about, which is pretty exciting. And Todd St is a member of the Black Youth Project 100, which is the organization leading the Black Lives Matter movement here in Chicago. Great, so we'll start with you, Jerry.
Okay. I think the thing I'd say first and foremost is don't be afraid. We're going to win this. The analogy I think of is 15 years ago when all of a sudden security cameras showed up on all the street corners and everybody's freaked out about Big Brother. And I said the same thing, don't be afraid, that's going to bite them in the ass. And we're seeing the results of that now. They have a whole lot more to hide than we do, and we have a whole lot more power than they do. And particularly when it comes to what we're dealing with here, mass ownership of the means of production and distribution of information is a power revolution. They've got some tricks they can use on us, but in the long run, this too is going to bite them in the ass. They're going to regret it, just like they regret the proliferation of video. When we do things like this, my principal concern is that people get afraid that I can't use my phone. I'm always being spied on. There are things you can do to deal with that, but more important than anything else is remember, in the long run, this is ours, and it's going to be stronger, and it's going to make us stronger.
I said in the video, we have to act as if we're already free, if we actually are going to get free together. So we need to do that. And there are a lot of ways for power, particularly the state and the police, to enforce, and one of the ways that they can enforce their power is by sowing distrust, making us, sort of afraid of using our own power. So we should just kind of reject that. And we should understand their capabilities, because when we understand their capabilities, we can counter it. Like Jerry said, they have so much video, they don't even know what to look for. They've got 22,000 cameras, and those are the public ones. When something happens, they don't know what to go look for.
Can you tell us just briefly about the FOIA suit and sort of the latest with some
so
of
sure.
that?
CPD is horrible about FOIAs. If you send them a FOIA, don't expect that they'll get back to you within the legal framework. No, just forget it. It's not gonna happen. So after about 4 or 5 months, we just decided that we're just gonna sue every single time, and we did, and we've kept suing, and we've continued to win. So maybe the lesson in there is don't do things on the police's timetable, because that's what they want, and so just continue to disrupt that way, regulate that.
So, and what is the FOIA asking for to prove that?
So the FOIA case specifically is asking how they describe this stuff to judges. So there's very specific provisions on how you can describe this technology. So the Chicago Police Department is calling it what are called pen registers or trap and trace orders, and Jerry can talk more about that, but it's a very, very, very low legal standard. They say that it's just oh, we're just recording people calling each other, but that's not what they're doing, right? So what we've seen across the country is it's all drug cases. They take this money that they seize from people that are, and then they just launder the evidence, right? It's called parallel construction. It happens from DEA, FBI, CPD, at the borders. This happens every day.
Cool. If you want to talk to us a little bit about what the Black Lives Matter movement is and how it connects to some of these bigger issues of surveillance more broadly.
Yeah, I think, so for me, just going over the video and stuff like that, I always come back to the question of why, right? Why are we being surveilled? Why are movements and grassroots organizations being surveilled? People like MLK, like Fred Hampton were surveilled not only because they were, grassroots organizers and whatnot, but because of what they were pushing for, right? They were pushing for radical sort of changes in the society that affected directly marginalized folks that were predominantly people of color, but also like poor folks and working class folks broadly, right? And then began to like build broad movements that were winning. And I think of like what our movement is today as a continuation of those struggles and of those campaigns. And for the Black Lives Matter movement being a movement that simply is trying to assert the fact that like our lives, like Black folks' lives actually matter in this society, and that we won't stop being in the streets and stop organizing until not only is that socially understood, but structurally understood. And that means challenging directly the institutions and the powers that inflict so much harm and death and murder on marginalized people. That's a threat to the status quo, right? It's a threat to people to the very few people at the top who hold so much power and wealth. And it requires them to monitor us, right? And I think luckily, and not luckily actually, it's through like the brilliance and the creativeness of folks who have been organizing in the past year and a half in this movement and learning from our history, that we are able to sort of circumvent some of the surveillance that happens and able to still, even though it's very clear that we are being monitored, right? That we are being surveilled, not only by governmental forces, like federal forces, but also by local law enforcement.
And private corporations do this too.
Right. So I think it shows that our ability to pull off certain actions and things of that nature, even though we're being monitored, shows the limits also of the state's ability to monitor us. Right? And the creativeness that we have within ourselves that go beyond the technology that we have, but also can incorporate it too.
Awesome.
It's so true. I mean, today I was out on the street with him, and I was with the march, all right, which was a distraction because there was another crew going into the Chicago Patrolmen's League credit union and locking down the tellers' windows. And they did an ace job of organizing that and executing it flawlessly, fully aware that we're being spied on, that they're grabbing information from our phones. It went like clockwork. The police were totally ambushed, and you use your head, you win every time. And he's absolutely right. When I say realize you're going to win and don't be afraid, I deal with these guys all the time. They're scared.
So I'm actually gonna throw it back to the audience and then like have you guys jump in. Yeah.
Can you just explain in a little more detail what Stingrays are able to do?
So it depends. And a lot of these surveillance programs, the answer is it depends. So Stingrays were developed by the US military. They are used primarily in things like drone strikes and what the NSA would call modern signals intelligence, SIGINT, right? So what they'll do is like fly a drone with a Stingray over Yemen, find someone's phone that they have selected, bomb them, kill them. So that was, the status for a long time. Then what happened is this stuff started getting imported into the US as part of the war on terror comes back to the US. They can do anything from voice capture, text capture, identifying particular cell phones, particular phone manufacturers. So every time a phone is manufactured, it has its own unique, what's called an IMEI. Those are unique to phones, whether or not you swap your SIM card out. So that can uniquely identify an individual's hardware. So that is the capabilities, right? The capabilities are capture text, capture voice, capture unique hardware, capture unique phone numbers from SIM cards. In the US, they don't seem to be capturing voice content or text messages, voice content directly, although they can it's a separate software upgrade. There's no evidence that in the US that the police departments have bought voice content, but they can certainly capture text messages, they can capture unique identifiers about a phone. So if you go up to a crowd, like let's say I do this 3 times and it's a Black Lives Matters rally, then you know that uniquely this is like the same 30 or 40 people that are gathering every time. That's enough information to gather a person's phone number, individual hardware, and some map of a social network. And the metadata is the entire story, right? The metadata tells you more than the actual data.
The metadata is actually a much more reliable indicator of your behavior than the data. What you say, we're all so full of shit, you don't know what to do with it. But what you do, who you talk to, where you go, it's like having a little devil in blue on your shoulder following everything you do. And the metadata is much
the whole
more,
story.
It's much more reliable.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
so
like the
I've got
DNA.
Got another question?
What do you think are the ramifications, more specifically on a program like a Stingray, that might come back to affect departments other than maybe sort of an image or reputation issue?
It's, I mean, you just look at what they're doing with the data they collect, the metadata, and what they do is they run it through their social algorithms and create maps of human networks and apply analysis to those networks, identifying what they call key nodes. And you know, the thing is that that's never going to work for them. You know, I think of a conversation I had once with the police commander down here about an action he was concerned about, and I'm like, doesn't the Fusion Center tell you everything you want to know? Okay, and he's, that fucking bullshit, nobody knows what that means. And it's how, or no, a very simple example, just last month out on the street with Black Lives Matters protest, and it was kind of a wild one, meaning nobody was really leading it, and those are the ones that they're most afraid of. And I'm talking to the commander of gang enforcement, which has just been disbanded. And, you know, he's asking me, you know, well, are they gonna block the expressway ramp? And I say, Kevin, you know, nobody was paying attention to the people tweeting about blocking the expressway ramp. But when it went out on the scanner and it got tweeted that you were scrambling the state police there, everybody noticed that. So of course they're gonna go to the expressway ramp because you fucking went there. And that's a good example, all right? They don't know how to analyze this information. They see all this traffic, they don't know how to make sense of it. I can look at those tweets and say, nobody listens to those jokers, all right? They can't do that. They have to react.
So there is a specific downfall to some of this secrecy that they've enabled for the last decade. So there's a specific law in Illinois about real-time location tracking. You can't do it without a warrant. And one of the things that we are backing into in our lawsuit is that, what are you telling judges about what this technology is? And I saw one case that they did with DA CPD. They called it digital analysis. Now, if you're a judge, what does that mean to you? Probably means nothing. You're gonna sign off on that warrant, and they did. And this was a Stingray case. You're basically lying to a judge to protect Harris Corporation, right? Or the FBI or whatever, or CPD. They're lying to judges. Now those cases have to come under review, and we don't even know which cases those are. The CPD, the lawyers for CPD said, well, these things are sealed under court order, and you should go to the judge and unseal the order. We're like, we don't even know which cases these are being used in, so how can I petition to get those unsealed, and in which cases and whatever?
Well, so I think there was a question by Joe, and then after that we'll get a few more in a row after.
I want to add one thing to him just to make it strong. How do we turn that on them? They're totally predictable, all right? I hear a deputy chief bark a command into his radio. They're a vertical organization. I know what's going to happen. They never know that about us. They never know that. That makes us stronger because we're not predictable.
Well, thanks, Jerry. Go ahead, Joe.
Like Todd in particular, like how do you find that balance in organizing and knowing like what needs to be kept quiet, what you should do out in the open?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what we know comes from the lessons that we've learned in different actions, right? And I think for us, we know like certain information, certain details around like our planning for whatever we're doing, whether it's a public forum or a direct action or that has like civil disobedience or whatever. Like, we know that at some point we're gonna have to, talk to each other face to face because of like the particular sort of nature and level of security of what we're trying to plan for, and also being comfortable with like doing that. I feel like, at least I grew up in a time where like I never grew up in a time without electronics, without a cell phone or a computer or whatever. So putting that down and moving or putting that in a secluded area and then going back to like pen and paper, it has been a training tool for myself, but also for like organizations and things of that nature. And I think it is the case that like, particularly for movements for Black liberation, movements for liberations of oppressed people of color, like understanding how the state sees how much they're in jeopardy when folks like this begin to organize. That was also a tool for me to understand how we should organize as we continue to move through.
So Spice call it tradecraft, and I think I also like the term because this is actually like a discipline, right?
How much money does the CPD spend on these Stingrays?
But I'm curious how you guys consider or think about involving people who are already afraid, right? Like don't want to get involved in direct action.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about the psychological effects of knowing that you're being surveilled.
So I'll try and like hit on some of these questions. So in terms of like fear, right, and like fearing being monitored, knowing that you're being monitored, and how do you navigate that? For number one, like as a Black person, I'm always in fear of my life, right? I've always grown up in fear of my life, regardless if I was being monitored or if I knew I was being monitored or not, even though like I used to get followed home by police from my school simply because I was young and Black, right? So I guess in some like sort of like morbid way, I've been conditioned to not be afraid of those things. But in terms of like other folks, right? I think it's for me in this movement, like I take some sort of solace in understanding that like I know the folks that I organize with have my back. I know that the police, the government, they're surveilling me because they're afraid of what we're doing, and that gives me confidence and power. And then I know that the more they do that, that just is a litmus test for the great work that we're doing. That's right. And I take comfort in that, right? And knowing that like the folks that came before me were doing much more stuff than we're doing right now, in terms of like directly confronting the state. And they still kept moving, right? They still kept going. And I guess the stakes are so high that I try to think more about the stakes and what is at stake and what is possible as opposed to like my own personal fears, right? And who I'm doing this for, right? Like I'm doing this for my people and for marginalized people all over the world too, right? In terms of like what Mario said, and I know I missed a question about fear, I'll come back to that, but like in terms of what Mario was asking specifically about the money that is, I don't know how much the CPD or the government spends on producing or giving money to these equipments or stuff like that. I do know that over the last decade, right, the CPD has paid out $521 million just to police brutality alone. So that amount of money, plus the amount of money that they get for tasers, for Stingrays, things of that nature, is a ridiculous amount of money. And I know for Black Youth Project 100, we're saying that all of that money, all of those resources and funds and tools and things of that nature going to a police department that for 95 or plus years has a history of brutalizing, terrorizing, and killing people of color in this city, that is absolutely ridiculous. And that the city consciously divests from those very communities, and that money should be going to those communities and building out the infrastructure and the things that they need, mental health clinics, education in terms of neighborhood public schools and things of that nature. And in terms of how we bring folks who are afraid of just being in movements like this, I think what I've learned by organizing in Chicago, this is where I started organizing, right, is there's a role for everyone. Everyone is important to movements like these, to creating structural change, to transforming our society, right, in the way that we see fit. And not everybody has to be out on the street directly confronting the police. There are roles for folks, in this movement, we need tech folks.
Is there any internal debate about the effectiveness or lack thereof of these methods?
In their wiser moments, they're aware of the fact that their signals intelligence leaves much to be desired. But they're doing the same thing that the United States government does, which is we're going to do what we can. And they like the idea of doing signals intelligence because they're control freaks, and that's a control freak's dream. All right? They're taking massive quantities of information and crunching numbers and analyzing it. And it's the kind of thing that an authoritarian personality likes. They like the picture, the data sets that they display that give them some sense of certainty in the face of uncertainty. On the other hand, when they're in their clearer moments, they realize that information isn't really reliable, and that if you want really reliable, that the quantity of information isn't what matters, it's the quality. And to assess quality, all the software programs in the world will not do what one person can do. And that's the issue. They know human intelligence is a whole lot better than signals intelligence, but human intelligence is very dangerous, extremely expensive. Putting spies into a group costs a lot of money. You put 2 spies in, it's not just them, it's all the people who shadow them. It's all the equipment that shadows them. So using just signals is doing it quick and dirty on the cheap. And again, good coppers know that. They know that the signals are not necessarily something you can rely on, but you work with the army you've got. And again, it's seductive to them. The computer told me to do this.
Bringing war to poor folks, to working class folks, bringing wars on drugs and wars on terror and that language and using that branding helps you to control people, helps you to suppress people's dissent and their questioning of your so-called authority and your power, right? And questioning why they are marginalized, why they cannot make ends meet, things of that nature. Majority of people in this country struggle with that. And putting in place these infrastructures and things of that, using these tools like Stingrays and all of that it entails, helps them to maintain that control and helps them to contain people's dissent. And that is just not, for whatever reason they believe that's useful and that's possible, it's not, right? There's too many.
This is why you have to organize against state power and against capital and all these things that all tie in together.
Cool. Well, these guys are going to be around for the rest of the night. I hope for you to ask them more questions. And so thank you so much. We'll give you guys a round of applause for coming.
Thank you.